we should just get started because it's time to get going. So good afternoon, good evening for those of you in the hot global community. I'm really proud and excited to be here with you today. We are Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, and today we're going to talk about colonialism and open mapping. We have 3 guest speakers. We have a bunch of questions that our community have voted on. In addition to that, we have a hope that you will also have some questions and comments. So with that, what we'll do is we'll do some quick introductions. Then I'll do a little bit of a recap on what happened in this morning's session. Then we'll ask some questions of our colleagues that are here, and then have some questions for you. So while we're doing that and while we're getting set up, we'd really love to know about you two. Who are you? Where are you? And what makes you excited about mapping? Those are the questions we're going to have our panelists doing. So if you can use the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, please do add that comment in there. So again, the question is, who are you? Where are you? And what gets you excited about mapping? Why don't we start off with Willie? Oh, I should introduce myself. I'm Heather Leson. I've been involved in Humanitarian OpenStreetMap for a decade. It's been my honor to be part of this community, to watch it grow, and I'm just super honored to be here. What I should tell you is that I grew up on, I'm from Northern Canada. I was born on Stony Creek and grew up on Cree land, then went to university in Odawa land and Algonquin land. So I recognize the fact that I did grow up on land that was not mine, that my family immigrated from Ukraine to. What I wanted to say as well is that I truly, truly appreciate that from that land, I was able to have an abundance of life and joy and learn from people. The first time I ever saw a map that had a mention about Aboriginal tribes in the continent of North America was when I was in grade 6. I had no real understanding or underpinning of who was there first and what the history was. And I never really understood it at that time. And now I'm here to learn with all of you here today. So recognizing who we are and where we're from is really important to help us get there. So Willie, tell us, who are you, where are you, and what gets you excited about mapping? Go ahead, Willie.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm really Franck from Cameroun, from the OpenStreetMap community, local community. My collaborators think I am a geo evangelist. They are not very wrong because as a missionary and religious use sacred books, I use the OSM map for practically the same purpose or the same reason. That is to improve daily life of people. But for today, I don't have the power to promise heaven or hell to anyone, not even for myself. I wouldn't speak on behalf of anyone, just my humble point of view, thanks to the geospatial technology that allowed us with the satellite to have a global view of what's going on the, but also keeping our feet on the ground. So it is a wonderful topic. It's my pleasure to be here today among the panelists to talk about something that is very important, that is mapping. Very important because the supposedly neutral geography is a tool of power, and it's used, first of all, to wage war. But what war are we talking about today? Is it war for labor during climbing, or war for natural resources during industrialization? Or is it war of digital data in an era where we are in a digital transformation? In this case, I think we need to identify who are the belligerents, and we need also to know, is it a normal war or is it an asymmetrical war? Throughout our history, mapping allowed explorers to discover new lands, and this way, all these expeditions usually were financed by the empire in order to extend their territory. My beautiful country, Cameroun, takes its name from the expansion Rio dos Camarões, which means stream river. And in 1472, it was a Portuguese, we call, I think, Fernando Po, was sailing just up to the estuary of the Douala River, which is called the Willy, and he was very impressed by the huge quantity of stream names. That's why Cameroun transformed to be Cameroun. So warm greeting to all our Portuguese friends that are connected today. But in the history of Cameroon, Cameroon has known like three successive domination: German first, French, and British. Just after the World War. If the Portuguese limited themselves, let's say, to shrimp, these three other countries had more appetite for the country that is called Cameroon, because we have a lot of rich natural resources. We have more than 250 ethnic groups. And at that time, we had a lot of precise maps, and some of those maps were even useful in a few years for some resolution of conflict border with our brother from Nigeria. So since the independence, Cameroon has not updated the maps. So 60 years is the average year of maps in Cameroon. And that's why I've been committed for more than 10 years now to use OpenStreetMap like a real alternative. And the worst thing is that it works. That's the proof that a paradigm shift is undergoing, is on way. But there's still a huge challenges. I think we will talk about some of them during this call. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Willie, and always good to learn. I know more about Cameroon now, so thank you. It's like we're virtually traveling together while we're learning and respecting each other. There are many of you here, and we're super honored. Just remember that if you are joining, please add your name, where you're from, and why you're excited about maps. Selene, tell us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Selene. I'm based in Costa Rica. I'm actually Nicaraguan. I don't know if any of you know Nicaragua, but it's like the land where the streets have no name. So it's really complicated to work with maps there. I'm a co-founder and coordinator of Geochicas. It's started as an women's in OpenStreetMap working group, but now it has expanded to other realms to other geo realms. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about feminist mapping and anti-colonial feminism. And thank you for being here. I just want to say hi to Selene, that I just saw her entering the room. She's also another co-founder of Geochicas. So hi. Thank you.
Selene. Thank you so much. It's really great to go from Cameroon to Nicaragua. And Trudy, tell us, who are you, where are you, and what gets you excited about mapping? Trudy? Did we lose you, Trudy?
Yeah, so my name is Gertrude. I stay in Zambia. I hope are you hearing me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I stay in Zambia. And what excites me about mapping is... I think everyone knows how I really love land is all full of communities. I'm giving an example for Zambia. So in Zambia, during the colonial time, they separated the map and ended up now displacing people from their ethnicity. In Zambia, in the eastern part of Zambia, we have a part where a chief is ruling over two countries. Actually, is ruling over three countries: Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia, because they cut his kingdom into three, which is quite bad. You can't displace people that much. So he sits in Malawi, but is ruling over Malawi, Zambia, and some part of Mozambique. Yet all this was his, but because of colonialism, they were displaced.
I think Trudy's sound...
Same applies from where I come from. The same thing happened. So you find that... Hello?
Hi, Trudy.
My video.
Yeah.
Hi, are you hearing me?
You. Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for removing the video. That's usually happens when the video is there. Yeah, so those are things that I feel like as communities, we need to be protected. And that is what motivates me to map, so that people get to know what really lies in their power. We can get back our names. You find that we had everything of ours. Why should we keep on taking on these colonial names and losing our things? Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy. Thanks, Willie. Thanks, Sally. So those of you that are just joining, I know there's a couple of you coming in a little bit late. We're just looking for your name, where you're from, and what gets you excited about mapping. And I'm just very thankful to go from Cameroun to Nicaragua or Costa Rica, and then to Zambia. So I want to give you just a little bit of a recap about what we talked about this morning in the call with our colleagues, David and Ima and Reuben. What we talked about was this tension between power and humanitarian action. What does that mean in terms of colonialism? Okay. David brought up the question about what does it mean to be open, and are we open enough to ask about consent? What does that mean if we're open enough to stop mapping? There was also quite a bit of conversation around what about the lack of open source tools and why open source tools are really important to be able to have that power and to take it back and to not have proprietary tools and to be free to shape it in your own way. That was brought up. And then there were some questions around, isn't colonialism a disaster that keeps happening? That was a really controversial comment. And I just, again, I know you weren't there this morning, so I thought I'd just warm up the room with what we talked about previously. We asked people for some definitions around colonialism, recolonialism, and neocolonialism. So I look forward to my colleagues really tackling that for us. And if you have definitions of what you think colonialism is, neocolonialism, or recolonialism, please put those in the chat for us, because we're really interested to hear what people's perspectives on it. And if you have resources, by all means, share those with them, and then the team can share it last. The last topic that they brought up this morning was really around how is colonialism and open mapping? What is the intersection in this time of COVID? What happens with vaccines? So if we don't have the power and if there are issues, what does that mean to replace or recolonialize when we're talking about the distribution of vaccines? This is not necessarily the topic that we should bring up, that we'll be able to go delve into today, but I just wanted to tell you about some of the questions that people brought forward, just to show you the wealth of knowledge in this community, but also just to show you that this is a really complex topic. So with that, again, please add your definitions and resources into the chat. We're happy for that. We're gonna go from Trudy to Selene to Willie, and we're gonna ask the question, why is it important to discuss colonialism and open mapping and open data? Why is this important? Why are we talking about this today? We'll start with Trudy. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is important because people need to be aware of really what happened long ago about colonialism, because in my view, I find that colonialism, I'm speaking now about data, colonialism in data. This is where we have data policies that are there for the interests of other people, and the local communities are left out. So if we talk about them, we feel like when you talk about colonialism, it is gonna make everyone aware to know these things we are neglecting, we don't want to pay attention to, or they tell you if you speak, this will happen to you. So if we make it open, people will know what to do about it. Even the local communities will know how to protect themselves. They'll be like, okay, this is what you did long ago. We don't want it to happen now. And it can be stopped. Thank you.
Very concise. Sally, tell us, how would you define colonialism? That would be really helpful for us. Just for folks that might have, I'm always confused and I want to make sure that I understand. So just in case, there's a lot of people here, so help us with that. And then again, what is this intersection of open data and mapping and colonialism? Why is it important that we have this discussion?
Well, I don't think that I cannot have like a concrete definition of colonialism, but I can give you an interpretation to what I understand about colonialism, also coming from a country that's on a region that was fairly roughly colonized by the Spanish, and it was and still has a lot of consequences in our daily living. And also going to what Trudy said, that we need to make memory to what has happened, and that we need to share and tell others what has happened in our territories and what consequences does that have in our social relations nowadays. So for me, colonialism is this system of oppression that it's like the materiality of the dynamics of power that come to our bodies and that come to our territories. And why is it important to think about colonialism and also mapping? It's because colonialism has taken away like the power for us to interpret the territory and the world as we want to see it has been taken away by colonialism. So for me, that's why it's so important, because we need to find a way in which we can understand and interpret the world as we want to see it from our own epistemes, from our own knowledge, from our situated conditions, from from our symbolic and material conditions that we have, from our own perspectives. That's why for me it's more important to talk about colonialism. Actually, I want to talk later on about anti-colonialism from a feminist perspective, but as a starting point, colonialism for me is that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sally. This morning, David was talking about, the definition and the concept of location, and how we relate to location is changed by culture, and how we decide directions, and how we think about our world and our position in the world, as you said, is very much tied to it. And so if we come with a Western or North American version of what is mapping, right, that could actually, as you rightfully said, so it's really interesting to hear David say that this morning from the Philippines, and he's in New Zealand right now, but in the Philippines, and then yourself, right, that there's this lived experience that we can reflect on. Over to Willie. Tell us about colonialism and mapping and open data. What is the intersection for you? And you did touch on it a little bit in your opening comments, but please, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I saw someone connecting from India, Ikukuf, because Muhammad Gandhi, I think Nelson Mandela also used to say, whatever is done for me, without me, is done against me. But I'm a little suspicious with, because some people use this code to justify like some community involvement. First of all, democracy, then participatory approach, and the fashion is for inclusive process now today. I would like to emphasize that colonialism should not be understood only as coming from outside. This it's often been like all those issues around colonialism are always been with a complicity from nationals. Consequently, our dear brother, sister from the OSM community across the world, even though you are in Europe, Africa, or everywhere, in their life as citizens, they have things to reproach their government, because everything is not always okay. There's not always transparency. It's not always because we are in Africa, because we have been colonized. That's right, but the issue is more complex. So whatever is done for us, without us, is done against us. In my opinion, we need to identify and categorize the finite beneficiaries for each initiative and integrate them. Not only we have to integrate it throughout the process, but above, to be ensured that they will be in power. And what is fundamental, the question we have to ask today is to know if open data or mapping is really an issue. What is the challenge behind? Also, what are the opportunities? And what motivates both to have a colonial posture? And in my opinion, finally, it is true that to have and to give a real independence is to bring people and is to guarantee that they have a perfect education. We need to empower people. This is very important. I don't want to describe this just like something from the north going to the south, or even in our own context, in our own state, we have a lot of difficulties. Some leaders have like some position that may be even difficult, stronger than what we can imagine. So it's a everyday life challenge. So that's what I can say about this for now.
And Willie, when did you start using OpenStreetMap?
When? Oh, like already 10 years today.
Wonderful. And do you think OpenStreetMap, do you think your experience in OpenStreetMap, has it shaped your view on colonialism or vice versa? Is there any relationship between those two?
I would take the example of Cameroun. or even technically, OpenStreetMap have a lot to bring. You know, our maps were built, as I said, 60 years is the average age of our maps, but definitely the local OSM community started to organize, and with the technology, we try to map by ourselves. That's what's really important, is that we are not waiting for the government to act. We are using like a bottom-up approach today, and this gives a lot of responsible and a lot of let's say yes, impact on what we are doing. And that is, we decide what we map because we are on the map. We need people to know what we really need in order to help. And this should impact all the digital sectors. That is, students map because they need data for their researches, and all the lecturers also. The startup also need data because they want to improve their application. Everyone needs location in services, and NGOs also need, because they usually do advocacy, they raise awareness on some issues, even the government. So on your question, I think today with the technology, and if we are well educated, we should be able to state and to have a position, and to be also capable to develop add value services on all this. And yes, I may come back on how can we, in the context of other issues project, maybe bring some activities or some manner to solve some issue like this.
Wonderful. And I think it really resonates with your comments around whose data and who's responsible for that. I think that's really clear, and what the offering is and what the potential is. And I really thank you for mentioning that. In further to whose data, I thought Selene could talk to us a little bit about what does it mean to be an anti-colonialist and to do mapping and to be an ethical feminist. And I need you to unpack those things for me, because I've had 3 cups of coffee and it is 7 o'clock. It's like 5:30 at night. So like, I think I have an understanding. I'm happy to read. I've read a bunch of books, but help me out here. What is the connection between, I have to make some jokes here, and they're poor sometimes, but you know, keeping it lively. So what are the connections between anti-colonialism and ethical feminism? And remember, novice.
Conversation that I've had with another fellow feminist mapper from Mexico. Her name is Carla. She's from another collective that's called Geobrujas. It's Geo Witches. And they come from an anti-colonial perspective as well. So, and also really from ecofeminism and anti-colonial feminism situated in Latin America, right? So we were talking, and actually I have another panel with her later today. You're all invited. But we were talking about how we could stop thinking about decolonization processes and start thinking about anti-colonialism, because it provides you like a frame for you to do something about it. It's like when we were talking, I don't know, a couple of months ago, we're also talking about not being racist and also being anti-racist. And what does that mean? What does anti-racist mean? It means that you need to take action. It means that you need to do something else. It means that you cannot just be there and stand there and state that you're an ally and state that you are not racist. It means that you need to do something. So it's the same with anti-colonialism. It means that we need to start thinking in ways in which we can deconstruct this entire machine of understanding the world from one perspective. So this is something that I've been trying to think about during the day when I was preparing for this. How can I talk about feminism and colonialism and mapping, and how does that interconnect, right? So I was talking to my partner and I was telling her, okay, so colonialism, how Spaniards, for example, came to America is that they came and took on the territory, right? And they expanded the realm, the Spanish realm, and whatever. And the bodies of women there were just part of the landscape. We're just part of the territory. We're just there. So we didn't have any kind of agency to nothing. So that's for me how this can be some sort of connection between anti-colonial feminism mapping territories, because anti-colonial feminism talks a lot about how we defend our territory and how we put our bodies as a way of our activism to defend those territories, and how our bodies have also been territories of conquer from men, from the institutions of power, from patriarchy, if you want. So I was trying to make a connection between bodies as territories and how we embody our practices and how we embody our experiences, and how that it's also something that's entirely connected in the way in which we use the space, in which we can actually navigate the territories and where we're embedded and where we're standing. And also, I wish, like I put on the chat, I wish I could have given this in Spanish, because I'm really more eloquent in Spanish. So forgive my broken English, trying to do my best to sound on point to what I want to say. But yeah, a little bit about that is that there's always been a dichotomy between women in private spaces and men in public spaces, and how now feminism and us as feminists, at least in Latin America, are trying to understand a way in which we can put ourselves out there. Those are, for example, many of the projects that we have in Geochicas, for example, the Streets of Women, the map. It's not only a representation of streets named after women. It's about women being out there in the space, in public space. It's recognizing women there. It's understanding that we have agency and that we have had a role in history, and that it's another type of how men, white men, the Western, has been colonializing knowledge, for example, by making us invisible, not only from the space, not only from public space, but also from the production of knowledge. And that's why, for example, this project for us is really important for us to talk about it. And I know Selene is here, so if she wants to say something, I invite her to say something as well.
You know, first,
I don't know if I made sense, but that's a little bit of what I'm thinking.
No, Sally, you do make sense. And I think it's a really complex topic, and we could spend, I'm sure, for each of what you've been already saying, there's a lot to unpack, and sorry to say unpack. There's a lot that we can keep talking about. I think it's really important. And as for note-taking, yes, there is a note-taking thing. Jika, can you help us with that? Thank you so much. Sorry, I forgot to paste the link. What I can say is that you said something really important. And earlier, Willie was speaking in French before we started. And you said to me, I would like to be able to speak in Spanish to be able to be understood. I've had this huge privilege in my job. We hire interpreters to run big meetings so that we can have people across the globe speak to each other. Even by the very nature of both of you speaking, and all of you, we could ask how many languages you speak, Selene? 2, 3, right? Yeah, yeah.
1.5.
Willie, 2, 3. Trudy, 2, 3, yeah. See, the thing is that we are a global community, right? And so even the object of mapping in our own language and understanding our context in our own language and who we are by our different genders or non-binary, like that changes the data, that changes who we are, and that changes what we put. So maybe someday we'll be able to have it in multiple languages. That's my dream and hope. Wish me luck. You know, I think it's important. So that says something about how we communicate. So for Trudy, I have a question for you now. How do you think the funding sources and the power with funding plays a role in colonialism? And I ask this because there's these questions were given from us, by the way, if you're wondering where we got these questions from. People actually submitted them to the community and said, these are the ones, and then our colleagues here picked the questions. How does this impact the map, the data, and the local communities where these projects focus? So if we say people before data, understand the context and the culture and respect local communities, what happens when money changes everything, Trudy?
Yeah, currently what is happening, actually money is changing everything. you're finding that the big people who have money and can sponsor the big projects with governments, they can sponsor projects with NGOs, they'll focus on a particular thing that is of interest to them, a particular interest for them. And if they're focusing on particular interest, they're not going to mind about who the local person is down there. All what they will care about is what they are getting out. And that is what we are seeing happening now. And if you look at before at colonialism, how they used to do it, they would come and they would do forced labor or do all these different things, but now it has changed. They're doing, everything is becoming so clean in how they're doing it, but it's still driving at the same concept, which was still exploiting the resources, and they are redefining economic production. So you find that the poor are remaining really, we are still having these big gaps of poverty, unemployment and all these things because of what they are creating. And they are enriching themselves. We have the big data guys. They are in every country. They're influencing the politics. They're influencing all these different things. Imagine if you influence politics in a country, you're going to give people leverage, those that will serve your interest, the presidents that will serve your interest. So you'll force people to consume that data which is for your benefit. I know of a country that donated imagery to a certain particular country. I went to their one of the remote sensing centers, and I'm like, oh, guys, I'm looking for this imagery. They're like, oh, we got this imagery from this country. This country donated this imagery. And you notice that this other country is literally used remote sensing to know where all the mines are, and they're displacing of people, which I feel like that is still colonialism. So why would you come and donate things to me because of your interest? And that is what is really happening. And you notice that even us in OSM, there are a lot of projects that you find in countries in OSM that they are there just because a donor is interested in a particular topic. But are the communities interested in that topic? Are the communities involved in this? Usually they are not. That's why even when the project ends, they all go and the community never benefits really that much. They benefit, if they're to benefit, they'll benefit like 0.5%. But who benefited more? 99%, the one who funded is the one who has benefited. And that is what is happening. So I feel like if we do not address, if funding is not controlled to stop being like this, we are going to have a big problem. You find that if they're even to fund a tech project, they will fund it if it's having, like it's a data project, they'll fund it just because they have interest in it. That is where communities need to come in and create their own technology to save themselves, because no one is going to love you like yourself. No one is going to feel pity for you. In my language in Uganda, we say, which means there is no one who will feel pity for you if they do not have an interest. Obviously, they have interest. That's why they are coming to us. Their interest that we are, as communities, we are being left out. We are just servicing their interest. And this is how colonialism is going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy. Maybe we can see if your video works now. It's just nice to see people's faces. Thanks for the impassioned examples. I really appreciate that. I think for any kind of civic technology or any kind of open project, we have a responsibility to work with communities. And, you know, as HOT grows and changes and other OpenStreetMap communities grow and change, there is something that really needs to be reflected on there. And I'm really glad that we can be convened in this conversation. And we're going to talk about Audacious soon and talk about the impact of that. And certainly there's been a lot of research around the impact of corporations. But there's also been an impact of governments, because the World Bank has funded things, the USAID has funded things, youth mappers. There's been incredible changes that have been for the positive too. So it's about balancing that. And I think the example I've seen about community engagement in Taiwan has been really fascinating, about how their OpenStreetMap community works together to decide what needs to be mapped and who maps it and how to map it. And it's actually in the school curriculum. And, you know, I know many of you are thinking about school curriculums too. So there's lots of positive ways to turn that around. But I think the reality is that there are some power dynamics in terms of money and local communities. And so with that, I want to ask, and not to set it up as a power dynamic, but I'm super excited to hear about Audacious. And I think we all are proud to see what happens within HOT, but there's a lot of discussion and reflection, which is part of these calls. So Willie, what portion of the audacious funding is committed to ensuring data ownership and sustained local change. So do you think that OSM is going to benefit from this? And how will it benefit, and how can we be mindful of that kind of power dynamic with it in terms of community authorship and how it gets maintained and what happens in terms of that? And so from your point of view, having a decade, and I think Trudy and Sila as well have a decade of experience in this community, tell us more about what you think the impact of Audacious is and how we need to be mindful of the kind of hurdles that you've been talking about. Over.
Thank you very much. I will give a proverb from Africa, and you, dear moderator, will say, you're going to explain if you have understand what does it mean. In Africa, we used to say the hand that gives is always above the hand that receives. What does it mean according to you? What I think is clear, but I want to be sure you understood what does it mean. The hand that gives is always above the hand that receives. The question is for my dear moderator, just to interact with you directly before giving some insight of the question.
You just put me on the spot. It's fun. So David was talking about this morning, you know, like, what does it mean to, if somebody is giving humanitarian response, but has previously been a colonialist, you know, where is it? And, or if somebody is taking resources from a country, but also supporting humanitarian action or development with OpenStreetMap, like, what is the tension between those two? So that's the hand that gives and the hand that gets, right? And so I don't think I have an answer for that. And I'd be super clear, I do work for a humanitarian organization, and we do talk about this quite frequently, about how can we make sure that local communities are really driving our agenda. And it's a big discussion and a big action in the work that I do. So I want to recognize my place in this role here. So I hope I didn't really give you a firm answer, but I want to say that there's a lot of tension there. And I think we all have to explore what's our relationship and what's our accountability. And so if you are if you're multitasking, I'd ask you to just pause and come back for just a second.
Exactly.
You know, and add in the comments. We'd like to know, what do you think you need to do or we need to do as a community to really flesh this out? I know we're going to keep still talking here, but what do we need to do in order to be able to address the power dynamics and also to make it more equitable and think through our privileges? And again, I recognize, again, as I said at the beginning of the call, I'm a host here and I'm a guest learning from my colleagues. So Willie, tell us about Audacious and your thoughts first.
Exactly. Thank you. No, as we just said, the hand that gives is always above the hand that receives. You know, even though we are giving to others, we always need to ask the question about what can they give back to us also. Everyone is always interested on the benefit they can gain on something. And who is the donor? Who is the recipient? How to take into account interests of everyone, and what does HOT gains by mapping 94 countries. And we need to feel the will to transmit, to reinforce, to build the capacity, the will to move from humanitarian approaches to responsible, ecological, and developed approaches. So because always the criticism that we have is that there's always a business model of humanitarian, and we don't want to stay only on these approaches. We need to think about development. It's also, that's why we also have to empower people. There are a lot of big companies that are taking interest in OpenStreetMap. That is interesting, that is good. But it is also necessary that local communities should be capable of conceiving, developing, and let's say they have to design by themselves and then use their own digital services themselves. It's very important. Otherwise, we are going to come back into a world where you have the digital imperialism in our own data, and this will be very difficult. So as I also said, there's no vacuum in nature. Not only one hand can tie a package. We can only do it together. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Let us think about the sustainability of the action that we want to settle. Mm-hmm. That's what I can say. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been thinking a lot about this gift, you know, this community, and how much, you know, over the years I've learned from each of you. And I think that it's really exciting that we can have this conversation today. But as Audacious and other things grow within humanitarian OpenStreetMap and with OpenStreetMap, you know, just being mindful of what decisions we make and how we make it together. I think that each of you have worked very hard in your local communities to make sure that resonates, and that you're in charge of trying to help with your allies and different groups. And I use in charge very lightly, by the way, because I think that everybody's really just on this journey trying to figure out how to. And so there's a couple of questions in the chat around how can people be allies? And something David said this morning is that it's our responsibility. And what he meant was, the girl who grew up in Northern Canada, it's my responsibility to understand how to be an ally, not to force you to teach me, right? He said, you know, make sure that you understand that you have to figure out how to do that. And so Hannah and a few others were asking for, are there guides or documents or things like that? And some people shared some stuff this morning. So if you have examples on articles and things that people can learn about this and how to be an anti-racist and how to be an anti-colonialist, please do put this on the chat, and I'm sure the community team from HOT will help us with that. We're also looking for some more questions here. And Abril has asked a question in Spanish. So Sally, I'm going to ask you to take a read of that if you could, and you know, help it out. And there are some shared notes. Thanks, Chica. It's in the chat. It's in the chat. And I'm sorry, I don't read Spanish. So it's from Abril Calderon.
Oh, yeah. She, the one that says no necesitamos programas de ayudas comunitarias. Is that the one? That we don't need plans or program for communal or communitary help or aid or nonprofits financing. Give me a second. I need to reread it, and then
it's okay. No, I'm thankful for it. Go ahead.
Give me a second. So what she's saying is that we don't need another country to exploit us and fiscalize ethically the actions in I'll send it in the chat. Give me a second.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. So I'm going to read this comment from Hannah, and I'm going to try, and if you have questions for our panelists, if you want to ask a question just for the one panelist, you can put the name there, or I can ask of all of them. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we're on time, but at the same time, go forward. So Hannah asks, in response to the question from me, which was how do we get there? It's important to recognize power inequalities which exists in the creation of mapping format and technology we use. That ties up something that Willie and Trudy were saying earlier too, about the application and the processes. So only transparency can make us accountable. Here. Trying to read Kevin's comment. Kevin, is it a comment or is it a question? That's a comment. All right, any other questions here? Okay, I'm going to ask Jeff's question. Okay, my big question is, how do we combat maybe anti-colonialists with metadata that often embeds colonial perspectives? So the data that exists now that might be having colonial perspectives. So whether it be admin levels, boundaries, Trudy talked about that earlier, administration. OSM's current practices in mapping have North American reservations, could use some improvement in this area. Now, Selene, who was hosting this morning's call, was talking about how, and David did as well, asking permission to map in areas. And I think this is really important about like who's map and who's mapping, okay? So I think that maybe perhaps that would be a really interesting thing. So how can we make sure that the terms that are locally matter or the decisions about the local community, what are some tips and guidelines that you think you would have on that? And maybe we'll start with Willie.
Okay, I think it is not an easy task because if we don't have information on your problem, we cannot help you. We need to have data to resolve problem. But do we have to make all the data open? That is the question. I think when we have the satellite imagery, because usually when we discuss, we say, okay, you don't have to map a specific area like military area. You say, okay, yes, I don't map it, but the data are already in Google. But it is different what we see in Google or what we see in satellite imagery is the building, the raster of the building, but we don't have the description, the attribute into it. And what makes problem today is not only the location or the map, what we see on the satellite imagery, is all the attribute, all the database that we are building into it. That's why it's important to regard of we have LGPD that we need to respect this. We need to protect all information that may be directly interested on person, directly people, because what is important in OpenStreetMap is we map all the physical, or what we see is what we map. And it's not interesting to map something that may create problem. I will not map the building in my neighborhood, indicating the region of all those that live there. It may be an information that can be destructive, and we don't really know who used this database. The question is, in the open data approach, is that everything is open. Yes, you can identify who creates the data, but you can't identify who used this data and for what purpose. And that's where it is difficult for us to analyze. From there, what type of information do we need to make available or not? So it's not just simple.
Right, right. Thank you so much. Sally or Trudy, would you like to take a crack at that in terms of how OSM works and how we can make sure that this narrative and the issues that encounter, how we can address?
Yeah, so the good thing with OSM, you can control and put what you want. So I think we should start not giving all the attribute. Actually, I was talking with David and we're talking about the same thing, and we're like, I think the attribute data shouldn't be put, all of it shouldn't be put there. We should just put a little bit of it. Because first of all, we don't have, there are very few tech companies in Africa or people that have the technical know-how to use this data, or who have the speed to work with this data. It's always now these companies that have the money and have the massive staff. You don't have the massive staff or the massive people you're going to employ to manipulate to work with this data. Obviously, you'll be at a disadvantage. You'll not move at anyone's speed. They will move at a speed faster than yours. So the community still will remain disadvantaged. So meaning we should not give everything we should give them. Because we have power and we have control. But the challenge is these maps are created by, like what we talked about earlier, big donor projects coming to sponsor these maps. Obviously, all this is gonna go in there. You understand? Because they are having an interest over someone who has donated the money or someone who has funded these big projects. So at the end of the day, the communities are going to be left disadvantaged. Even when you don't want to share everything, you'll end up sharing everything because you have no choice, because the money is not yours, the money is from that side. Yeah. So what we need to do is, how can we make sure that when these projects are being designed, what attributes should be shared, and the attribute should not disadvantage the local people. And let's involve in the tech companies in the communities where we are making these projects and tell them, okay, guys, this data is being used, this is how you can use it. And also help them so that they can be empowered to use this data to create solutions for them. Instead of us just waiting, because these companies have big money, which we cannot manage us, honestly. We cannot run at their expense. These are people who are running with $100 million budgets. As you're running on $10,000 budget, if I'm gonna develop a system as Trudy, I'll take maybe 2 months. Then they'll come up with all this big money, employ whoever they want, and ride faster than us. So by the time you want to do it, they've already done it because they have the money, and you're left at a disadvantage. So some of the things that we need to address. What should we do to help the communities to take control over this data? Thank you.
Thank you so much. This really brings back to the point that community is hard and beautiful, right? And let's be clear that the donors and the tech companies or whatever, they're part of this community too. And so being a good community citizen means talking to your neighbors, right? Like in general, let's just go to basic levels. It means talking to your neighbors and designing and negotiating with your neighbors. So if there's one recommendation I come out of that for our friends at HOT and for all of us, is that we need to have those negotiation skills and the education, as Willie mentioned earlier, and then the lenses, which Selene mentioned, to make sure that we have those kind of softer skills around the map to be able to support and have projects and programs and activities that reflect better for the community. I think that's what I'm gleaning from some of the things you're saying. And if I'm wrong, please do correct me. We got about 7 more minutes. I'm going to just read one more question from the chat, and then I'm going to ask each of you to kind of ask some final reflections if you can. And so for those of you that are putting the questions in the chat, just remember that we're going to keep a download of all the questions. And I think that there's an ongoing conversation that has to happen. So I'm really feeling the richness of all your questions here. So JM Rosso asked a question from the previous session. Any advice or mapping tools, free or friendly, on how communities with poor connection or limited technical resources, how can they help have their vision of the map? So what do you do with low tech context? How can we make sure that it becomes the people in the community before the tech? And how do we make sure that empowerment of what happens on the map is their version? Anybody else who would like to take that comment? Maybe Selene, can I put you on the spot? We haven't heard from you in a little bit.
That's an amazing question, and it's a question that we've been asking ourselves for many years now. Mm-hmm. I think that we cannot, okay, let me try to put this together. Is technology the only solution for people to be in the maps, or the communities to participate, or that the communities to be heard? Is that the only way, like for us, because I come from a really low tech country. Nicaragua has a really low, not so bad, but yeah. But do we need to force them into how we do things for them to find the way in which they, like, for them to get the technologies that we use, for them to get the skills that we pretend for them to have, for them to bend themselves to our systems? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, is that, like, I don't have the answer. Mm-hmm. I just have more questions around this. But is it possible for us to understand their context instead of for them to be part of our system?
That is like a PhD. Please write that. Like, seriously. No, I think, no, truly.
It's actually part of my PhD dissertation. I didn't say that, but I'm a PhD candidate.
I did not know that. This is not a plant. I think it's a really critical thing. So what you're saying is, yes, OpenStreetMap, yes, technology is great, but first and foremost is, did we listen to the community? Did we involve the community?
And it's not, again, like us from outside involving them for a project that we are going to conduct in their territory. Mm-hmm. It's how we can start thinking about that, because I know humanitarian aid comes as a response to something, mm-hmm. and usually comes as a response of a lack of institutions, strong democracies, strong public policies. So how can we stop thinking about, we need to involve you in your processes. We need to make you visible in your territory. Like, how can we shift that way of thinking from a humanitarian aid perspective, for example, or from a feminist perspective? Stop extracting knowledge, stop extracting experiences, and start building together those experiences.
I read a blog post quite a few years ago that it said, stop throwing a map at it. And it's not that. And I know this sounds very colloquial. That was when I was at Ushahidi. And I say this because it comes back down to what Willie was saying earlier. Understand what the needs are in the community, and the map as a tool and the community around it decides. So we have a mechanism and a beautiful global community and all these beautiful people. Again, everyone's a community member in my books, right? It's just about being a good citizen. So if we have good citizens and good community members, the responsibility is to serve a need, right? And to work on that need from the community's point of view is what I got from Willie and from Gertrude earlier. So there's some real tension between those 2 points. We have 3 minutes left. There's a lot of great comments in there. Just remember, if you did come late, make sure that you tell us where you're from and why maps matter to you. There's a lot of questions in here about about what do we do forward? How do we capitalize on, as a network around Audacious and the larger OpenStreetMap community, in supporting the kind of questions that we have, but building with those to inform it. And I think Audacious gives HOT the opportunity that we never had before in terms of really getting that time to think about how we work better with local communities. That's pretty exciting. So with that, there's a lot of comments that I'm sure you have. So I'm going to just ask for a quick go around, couple kind of closing points, because I've already said my closing points. To Willie, tell us, what do you think you'd like for people to do next with this information? And what are some things that are your kind of takeaways from this meeting? And if anybody else has a takeaway, you're welcome to put it in the chat too, but I'm going to ask the speakers for their takeaways. Just one thing that you think really kind of resonated with you. Willie, go ahead.
I don't really think if I can say it in few words, but let us, you can't stop the world from changing. WhatsApp does not need permission to extend itself. We need to have strong policies, digital policies at different levels, national, subnational, maybe local, for the smart city of tomorrow. We need to protect our citizens. We need to have local preference in tenders. We cannot accept that in some point of view, huge and big company come and challenge us in our local territory. The problem is global, the action must be local. And we have discussed on topic like this, and in our own local ecosystem, we come out with a solution. In upcoming week or month, we're going to launch a social network based on OpenStreetMap. And we identify 3 pillars. The first pillar is data. Data is all about OpenStreetMap data. Mm-hmm. Data is all about your portfolio, your experience, what you know, your knowledge. Mm-hmm. The second pillar is connection. We need to connect all those initiatives. We need to connect people because alone they are not strong. But when they are connected, they can raise a lot of awareness. We can hear them. And we need to empower those people. This is the only way the process will be sustainable. And we will also need to set up a system where we can monitor and evaluate the sustainable development goals to be sure that it changes everyday life for those citizens.
And can people contact you, Willie, and ask you more questions later?
Of course.
Absolutely. Thanks, Willie. Trudy, tell us any kind of takeaways. And again, if you're listening along too, we'd love to see your takeaways in the chat. Any takeaways or things you'd like for people to just reflect on from your point here, Trudy?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm working with, it's kind of like what Willie has talked about. I'm working with the UNDP so that we see how best can communities be involved in the sustainable development goals using location data. So that's what we are working on, and we are doing it for Zambia, and also to make sure that people use it as a chat so that people get to know what projects are in their communities so that they get involved in these projects and contribute. So it's kind of like also this a chat-based system and also an awareness system to know what sustainable development goals are in their communities up to the world level. So that's what we are working on.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Trudy, for your reflections today. And Sally, just a quick takeaway. I know we're a little bit over, but I just want to give everybody quick space. And again, comments and takeaways are welcome in the chat from everybody. Go ahead, please.
Maybe just to question ourselves who makes the maps, who gets mapped, how we mapped, understanding map as a process, mapping as a process, and as a practice as well. And I think that.
Wonderful. You know, maps have changed so many of our lives, and certainly it brought us together. I don't know if all of us wouldn't have met had we not been connected by Humanitarian OpenStreetMap and OpenStreetMap. So I'm very thankful for the kind of convening that it is. And so if I think about maps as a community center, we are the ones who shape the map together, right? Whatever the map project is and whatever project you're working on, it is one global, beautiful project. So I want to thank Willie, Selene, and Trudy for their comments, for Benjamin for his help in the background, and Gia and Jika and Arlene for all the advertisements and stuff. So for each of you here, this has been recorded. This is not the end of the conversation, and I would recommend highly that this conversation continue again and that there be more notes on this and more follow-up. 2, that State of the Map is coming. There should be some sessions on that at State of the Map. So I would encourage everyone to go to State of the Map. And 3, please join OpenStreetMap Foundation and help this map project be part of your project. I just want to thank HOT for opening this space. And I've had such a privilege to be part of this conversation with all of you. And I look forward to downloading the chat and reading to your questions. And again, we are all on this journey to understand how we can support and understand how we can address comments around comments and problems around colonialism, and learn how we can be better map neighbors, if you will. So with that, I look forward to further comments from anybody, and please do reach out to our speakers. They are obviously very talented and impassioned. Please recommend them to be on your panels somewhere so they can talk more about it. So with that, I want to say thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye. Bye. Yeah.